Okay, welcome back. This is part two of three of your journalism chapter. This would be chapters 13 and 8, of course, in part one, which I hope you've watched or plan to watch. We talked a lot about, obviously, the industry itself. We talked about the differences of, first of all, we talked about what makes something newsworthy. We talked about the differences between hard news, soft news, investigative journalism. We talked about a term called backpack journalism. Anyway, there's lots of videos to go with that you need to watch as well. So make sure you carve out time. If you haven't seen part one yet, make sure you watch it. But on to part two. Okay, let's talk about the differences between print, television, and internet news, or digital for that matter. And basically, broadcast when you're watching broadcast news, right? Whether it be on cable news, you're watching it on your local channel 7 or channel 4 or whatever. It's oftentimes driven by the technology, not the story. So, very much the television broadcast news industry. I'm not saying that they're not obviously interested in giving you news and information, but they have a fascination with obviously technology. How quick can we get you the story? How cool can we make it look? How cool can we package it? That's very much something that is in the broadcast realm. And yeah, so technology really, just watch election coverage, for example. When they have election coverage, as particularly presidential election coverage come up every 4 years, you see all these cable channels like basically rolling out all these new innovations they have. And some of it's pretty cool, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I think when they started basically being able to kind of break down the anchor being able to, literally stand there on stage and kind of swipe like a big like iPad, if you will, like a big touch screen of, being able to look at different, like, for example, vote totals from counties and, swing states or whatever. I thought that was very compelling. They obviously in broadcast news, we time stories to fit commercials. We very much are, particularly if you watch legacy media for that matter, when you're watching like the ABC 7 from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, there are 6 or 7 commercial breaks that are built into these hour-long shows, and there's a certain amount of time that has to be fit between, from the first commercial break to the second to the third. And so stories are designed to be efficient at fitting into these time blocks, right? So I should say in part one of the things we talked about, 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes has like 11 to 13 minutes to tell you a story. ABC 7 has a reporter has a minute and a half to a minute 45 or even shorter. And that's because we're trying to fit commercials in, which is how, obviously broadcast stations, the media makes its money is through commercial and advertising. We expect when we watch our anchors on television, whether they be on Fox News or CNN or MS Now or ABC 7 or NBC 4, CBS 2, whatever, we expect them to be credible and provide believable imagery. We take a leap of faith that what we're seeing is actually true. And so in a little bit here, I'm going to be talking about how that trust that we have with news and whether we're getting it presented kind of down the middle and fair, that's really getting challenged now in 2026. So there's always been this, I think, inclination with people that you see and things that you see, that there's a more credible element because you see it, right? But I think that, now in the age of social media and AI and everything else in between, and just, bias, that I think, we have a tendency to be skeptical now of just about everything. Print reporters, I should say those that write for newspaper, for example, or write articles that appear on newspaper websites, they report on stories where they occur. So whereas television can kind of get its information through technology from far-reaching places without necessarily having someone on the ground there. Maybe they have a photographer that can send them back video. Maybe it's just a matter of taking, a video from people that have phones that have taken video of things that have happened there. Print reporters actually have this reputation of going to the actual scene and reporting on stories where they occur. Also, where we time stories in the broadcast industry to fit commercials, the long time for newspapers have long time had a tradition of, I should say, cutting stories to fit physical space. So in just a bit here, I'm going to talk about the inverted pyramid. That'll actually be in the third video. But, one of the reasons that there is something called the inverted pyramid is because you actually had news reminders who physically take, stories that are written, and, their word count literally is sliced. Like if someone writes 1,000-word story, they might get it sliced down to 600 words, and that those 600 words are what ultimately winds up in the, in the newspaper, because you can only basically the thing with advertising in the print industry is the more advertising you sold, the more pages of a paper you could print. Less advertising, obviously less space, and so we're in the idea of less advertising, less space time frame now, and so therefore stories are getting cut right and left to kind of fit into that box. There's a certain detachment that print reporters, I think, have always kind of had, or perception of it. As someone who has lived with, in the past, me being a broadcaster, I lived with roommates who were actually in the print reporter realm. I think that they were kind of sort of, well, I don't want to say anonymous, but certainly weren't recognized in public. They were certainly recognized on stories, but there was a certain anonymity to them, so that, and also they could, feel free to kind of, I think, freely write and report on things. Whereas when you were in someone's living room every night, there was this, I think there was a little bit different dynamic. So there's a certain detachment with print reporters that exists. Also, when it comes to broadcast, we have a pretty face happy talk culture, right? I think, the idea of the anchor sitting there at the desk, like Ron Burgundy, right? I think there's somewhat, we do get somewhat of a stereotype of that, right? Of the attractive but half-witted anchor, whether that be male, female, right? You see happy talk, or ad-libbed or scripted news team banter, where they're going into a story or coming out of a story, and they kind of sort of are sitting on what's called a two-shot, and they kind of, I don't know, bullshit. Sorry, pardon my French, but they bullshit for 10 or 15, 20 seconds, and that's that banter, right? That's kind of very much, I think, a something that we've done, that I think people, when they think of broadcast news, they might think of their anchors doing that. We also have something called sound bites, right? Which in newspaper lingo, we call it a quote. So if you read an article, you see somebody quoted in an article. Well, in our industry, obviously, it's called a soundbite, where basically we've created this entire culture. So when people are learning how to talk to media, for example, whether that be celebrities or sports athletes or people that are just going to be constantly out in front of the media, they learn how to basically answer questions regardless of whether it's a tough question or an easy question. They learn how to answer it in really short snippets, because that's how you kind of fit it into that box of broadcast television. And of course, they become the focus of intense criticism, the sound bites, I should say, because if you just listen to a politician, and you could ask a politician anything, and a lot of times they'll say the same thing in 10 or 12 seconds, and without really answering the question without really answering it, if you know what I mean. As for the digital internet era, I guess, or just like modern, I suppose the 24/7 news cycle has changed the definition of news. Along with obviously being able to get it anytime, any place. In terms of just our, through our phones and whatnot. We also have gotten into the, I would say the genre, I don't want to call it genre, I want to say basically the template of cable news, right? The template of cable news, where, CNN started it in like the early 1980s, and then Fox News came along, and then MSNBC came along, and you have these cable stations now that are on the air for 24 hours, 7 days a week, and each are pandering to a certain audience. CNN and MSNBC, which is now MS Now, I guess you could say, they very much are, I think, pandering toward a left-leaning Democrat, liberal type of audience, where Fox News is really kind of, I think, decided it's going to make its money by pandering to folks on the right or conservatives. And basically, we talk about echo chambers, right? We talked about that with social media. Well, this is kind of television's form of social media. And also the fact that because you're having to fill a 24/7 news cycle, that you're going to have to fill it with people just talking and talking and talking about whatever the news cycle of the day is, right? And so that's also lent itself to how our definition of news has changed. I mean, I'm not kidding you. When I was much younger, college age, high school age, there was no concept of 24/7 news. You watched your local news at 5 o'clock. You watched your nightly news at 6:30. You would get the paper in the morning. You might hear some stuff happening on the radio with an occasional update, but that was it. And now, of course, we're in the 24/7 realm. And, throw in the fact that you've got the entire digital universe now where, you can get news constantly and you don't even know if you're getting it accurate or not. So I'm looking on my phone here and, I've got apps that are telling me things that are happening up to the minute. All right. Trust in media and journalism. I want to spend a couple minutes definitely talking about this because I think when you guys are trying to learn media literacy, for example, and try to spot things that you see or hear, first of all, I want to encourage you before I go down this road that I think that you should never just rely on one news organization for your news. Now, again, I draw a little bit of a difference in line between what's happening locally and nationally. I think, again, not to say that you should watch one local station over the other all the time, although I'm partial to ABC7 since I work for them. But that being said, whether you're watching CBS2, whether you're watching ABC7, NBC4, you're going to see a lot of similar stories. And I don't think there's going to be a dramatic difference in terms of how those stories are being shared. I think there's talented people in all of those newsrooms. But once you get outside kind of the local news realm, you really start to see where, there's warning signs of where there's a complete lack of mistrust in how journalism is being sort of portrayed, or it has turned into more of it's not accurate, or it lacks context. So I want to go through some examples of trust in media journalism where not only what the American people think of it, whether they trust modern journalism, but really where there's some pretty blatant examples, I think, of areas where we've made ourselves vulnerable. So here's a little mishmash, by the way, of just things that, and this is where people go crazy, or at least, will definitely chirp about on social media. So I want to give you an example. So here's the Washington Post. And basically, when Trump killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, I want to say that was about a year and a half ago or so, an Iranian spiritual leader, and also one of Iran's, many believe was one of Iran's, top reasons for terror. The Washington Post sort of painted this much softer view of him just in the headline. So you can see Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State, dies at 48. And it wasn't like it was, Iran's top terrorist leader dies at 48 or, whatever. I mean, just imagine, if you will, taking a headline like this and trying to spin Adolf Hitler in a sort of a less than evil light. I think people would probably, rightfully so, have an issue with that. Well, I think there was a lot of people that were clearly not, happy the Washington Post kind of portrayed this guy as, somewhat of a sympathetic character just with a simple headline. I'll let you draw your own conclusion on that, but that was certainly something that was as contrasted to, for example, Chuck Norris, who recently just passed away in his 80s. He was on vacation in Hawaii. And here is the Variety's headline: Chuck Norris was a great action star, but politics may overshadow his legacy. So you look here, positive, softer, kind of a harsher painting of his legacy in a headline. So, and then here's another interesting contrast. So obviously back in 2020, 2021, we had two major things that were happening at that point. One was obviously COVID and lockdowns, and the other one was Black Lives Matter. And we had, protests, numerous protests in the midst of Black Lives Matter during the height of COVID. And of course, one of the things that was the media was kind of taking some water on for, I should say, or shots on, was the fact that there were many media outlets that basically, when someone would point out, hey, you have us all sheltering in place, or we're supposed to, not be gathering in large groups, and yet here we have these, these protests for Black Lives Matter, and how is that not kind of a super spreader when people like that get together? To which you had some, columnists saying, how much did protests contribute to LA's COVID-19 surge? The data is still sparse. So somebody here, basically insinuating that from a journalist standpoint that, well, I don't think that, maybe because, it was for a righteous cause, that maybe we should downplay the fact that we had all these folks gathering and, maybe potentially spreading COVID. And then over here, this was actually when folks who were against, obviously, vaccine mandates went out and actually protested. And I know it's hard to see, but basically the insinuation by the BBC here is that these were super spreaders. So, two, sets of large groups, large scale protests, one Black Lives Matter, the other one over vaccine mandates, one being portrayed as, I think that, there's no data to suggest that there was anything that was spreading here versus this could be super spreader. So you can see where, if you're somebody that looks at journalism and tries, you want it to be fair and balanced and call balls and strikes, if you will, that, these are definite examples of things that are problematic. So let's talk about values in American journalism. Reporters have traditionally aligned facts with an objective position and values with subjective feelings, meaning that there was always this, I think, belief that regardless of what you felt about something, that you could put your personal feelings aside and kind of cover a story fairly, right? And that has definitely, I think, shifted for sure. I'll give you a specific example here in a second, but basically, I think there's no doubt that when you look at partisan cable channels, and again, I'm not just aiming this at one or the other, I'm aiming it at all of them. I no doubt think that a lot of these cable channels have decided to pander to certain audiences, and that we now see a blurring line between objective and subjective, right? Very much the case. And I will say one of the things that I think bothered me the most was I was at USC, a handful of years ago, and I was there for a journalism day, and there was a instructor in the room that kept talking about telling his young journalists to pick a side. And I was deeply against that, and am deeply against that, and pushed back. And, we got into a spirited debate. And I just think that, the reason that we're in a lack of trust in the journalism industry right now, in the field of journalism, is because, we have people that are literally trying to take whatever they believe in and try to shove it down the throat of someone that may not believe in it, right? And I don't care what the issue is. It's bad for business, right? I think there's a difference between being a journalist and being someone that isn't an advocate or a PR person. So anyway, so reporters, there is a belief leading to suspicion of press bias, including reporters are out to get their subjects, leaving key facts out of reporting. I think context is very critical. I think that happens more so than I care to imagine. It happens more frequently than I would like to say it doesn't. Ignoring or doxing stories. So, for example, if you click on that link, which I encourage you to do, it talks about in the run-up to the Biden, when Trump was running for re-election against then candidate Biden in 2020. Basically, there was a laptop story. There was a laptop that was dropped off at a Delaware computer store by the president's son, Hunter Biden, that had all sorts of things on it that were very likely not flattering to not just Hunter, but to his father. And there was a concerted effort by CNN and NBC and a lot of other networks to basically bury that story. Literally, Twitter deplatformed the New York Post for actually reporting that there was a laptop that existed. And that's ultimately what led Elon Musk to buy Twitter, now X, because of the deplatforming of those things and doxing of stories. And it turned out that laptop was absolutely 100% true. And it could have definitely have swayed the election late in October of 2020. And it's a black mark, I would say, on the media industry for not being more curious. Yeah, that was probably the top example of a story that was doxed that was actually should have been covered. And by the way, look at that graphic there. 2024 presidential coverage was the worst in history, according to a media researcher. In 2024, Kamala Harris, almost 80% of her the stories that were produced about her were positive, where 15% were positive for Trump, with the Democratic advantage being 63%. Now, again, I'm not here to debate whether you should have voted for either person, if you like Trump, don't like Trump, etc. But the fact is that we really should be in the journalism industry, should be Switzerland, and oftentimes we're not, and it's what's getting us in trouble with the American public. And another thing that I think is underrated, but I don't think a lot of people understand, is that the press is too close to its subjects. The people that we cover, oftentimes, if we are close to them, then it's very hard to be critical of them when that need arises. And so there's no doubt that a lot of folks in the White House press pool want to have access to presidents, and so they feel like if they're super critical, then they'll get their access cut off. And there's numerous examples of this in different administrations, cutting off access to news organizations that they deem too critical of their coverage. So just something to chew on. All right, how about trust in media and journalism? Well, as you can see, if you look at this graphic, the easiest way to look at this is that it's America's mistrust and America's trust of journalism has gone in opposite directions over the past 50 years. In fact, if you add up the not very much and great deal, fair amount of, no trust at all and not very much trust, you're looking at near 80% or 80% have not very much trust or none at all, and only 28% or so have a great deal or fair amount of trust. That is not good. And let me show you some other numbers here. Americans' confidence in the mass media has edged down to a new low, which is 28% expressing a great deal or fair amount of trust in newspapers, television, and radio to report the news fully, accurately, and fairly. This is down from 31% last year and 40% 5 years ago. Meanwhile, 7 in 10 U.S. adults now say they have not very much confidence or none at all in the American media. Not good. We need to rebuild that trust, and I think that starts with starting to really tell stories in a fair and balanced way, even if you don't want to hear it. Media trust is at record low among all party groups. Although Democrats and Republicans continue to express different levels of trust in the news media, the percentages with high confidence in reporting are at low points among all party groups. Republican confidence, which hasn't risen above 21% since 2015, has dropped to single digits for the first time in this trend. So only 8% of Republicans have trust in what is called the mass media being, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, LA Times, just traditional media outlets. Independence trust has not reached the majority level since 2003, and the latest 27% reading matches last year's historical low. And it should probably tell you something that the number is significantly higher for Democrats, which probably is because whether it's actual or it's perceived that the majority of information being shared by traditional / legacy media and mass media in general is probably favoring Democrats more than it's favoring other groups. Therefore, you still have 51% of Democrats now express trust in the media, which is a repeat of the low previously seen in 2016. So when it's 51% versus 8% for Republicans, something is amiss. That's all I'm going to say. I don't think that number should be ignored. Anyway, here's a couple of examples, recent examples, I should say, of when I talk about context or just, whether it's intentional or misleading, how it can really cause a dysfunction between a news organization and your audience. And I'm going to pick on 60 Minutes for this in CBS, which an example would have been the selective editing of when Kamala Harris was on 60 Minutes during the run up to the 2024 election. And there was a allegation that CBS, or at least folks that were behind the scenes at CBS, were really trying to kind of, I think, sort of help her because she was not necessarily the most well-spoken candidate from a standpoint that she oftentimes would so I think veer off script. She would sometimes get very confusing in the way she spoke. And here is a perfect example of that. And again, I will say in all fairness here, that the person analyzing this is someone from the conservative side of the fence. So it's obviously going to be not pro Kamala, but here you go.
The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region.
Kamala Harris went on this 60 Minutes interview yesterday. Sunday night. And we showed you some clips of it yesterday. And now CBS is actually selectively editing the interview for replays. Take a look at this. This is wild.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Did you see what they just did right there? She gave a completely nonsensical, ridiculous answer. We played that answer yesterday, and now where they've posted it in various places online, they have edited that out and put in this very direct response. They are in service to the Democrat Party. CBS 60 Minutes. And what a damn shame. I'm sorry, what's the interviewer's name again? Do you guys remember? Bill Whitaker, who did a really fine job there. He should be seriously pissed because he did ask good questions and he trapped her with, it wasn't even a trap. In essence, he has good questions that shouldn't have been a trap for a competent person, but her AI programming is just not that great. She is the.
So anyway, like I said, it gets opinionated there at the end for sure. But I think there's some validity to the there's some validity, I should say, to the argument that she was definitely in the midst of a word salad with her answer, and that basically that second answer that you saw where she was much cleaner, that was actually taken from a completely different question. So there was definitely an effort, I think, there from the producer, from the editor. I would say the producer probably more than the editor. The producer to basically marry the two to make her sound a little bit more cohesive. And you shouldn't do that. I understand wanting to, in the interest of time, you're trying to, maybe have somebody that's on a long winding answer for like 2.5 minutes and you're trying to answer part of A and then maybe at the tail end put them together so it makes a little bit more sense into what they're answering. But in this case, to completely take a answer from something completely separate and then place it there, I think, was not a great look for CBS. That also, by the way, led to a lawsuit that the Trump administration filed in a Texas federal court in October 2024. That actually, this is before he was, he had gotten reelected. So this is right before he was elected again, and basically targeted CBS News and its parent Paramount Global And he claimed CBS aired a selectively edited version that misled viewers. And also, I remember the story. Obviously, he was concerned, his people were concerned that this would make her more sympathetic, more whatever. I mean, that it would have an effect on who was voting for who in that election. So he sought $10 to $20 billion in damages under Texas law. CBS, of course, called the lawsuit baseless and an attack on press freedom, argued that editorial choices are protected by the First Amendment. To a degree, they certainly are. Filed motion to dismiss, calling the suit an affront to the First Amendment. The resolution came in July of 2025 when Trump obviously was already president. They settled the case for $16 million, which is significantly less than the billions of dollars that he sued for. The funds that they did get were directed toward Trump's library and legal costs. No admission of wrongdoing or apology from CBS. And CBS agreed to release the future presidential interview transcripts. And now you'll see a lot of times you will see news organizations, when they do a sit down with a presidential candidate, they will generally release everything so that the public can kind of make their determination on what they think, so they can do a compare and contrast. Now, CBS not the only organization to do this. The BBC has been in trouble multiple times for doing the same thing. But I just wanted to kind of highlight at least something that would be tangible to you. So the legal and political implications are: it's a rare use of consumer protection law against a news organization. The settlement raised concerns about press freedom and a chilling effect. Basically that even just a settlement kind of implies that 60 Minutes got slapped for doing something misleading. And there was also obviously a merger that was going on with Paramount and Skydance Media. That a merger has now gone through, and that there might have been the Trump administration putting pressure on on Paramount to settle, so that So anyway, an analyst suggests merger pressure influenced settlement decision. Other recent missteps. This was just like a month ago or so. This one was a little more straightforward, I think. Well, I definitely think there was I had a particular problem with this one, just because I think it was so misleading. There is a CNN anchor by the name of Abby Phillip who issued a public apology after an inaccurate on-air statement about an attempted New York City terror attack. So the story was that there was a pair of guys that basically, tried to basically throw a bomb at an anti-Muslim rally in front of the mayor's office, and very clearly were there to do that, not to go after the mayor. But if you had watched CNN anchor Abby Phillip report on it, she seemed to imply that they were there to throw it at that the mayor was the one that was the target, when that was not the case. And I think it's been proven emphatically that was not the case. The error aired during CNN Newsnight. The report incorrectly stated the attack was against Mayor Zohran Mamdani. Why it matters: the statement aired shortly after another CNN report about the suspects had been retracted. So basically, on that same day, where CNN initially was blaming the attack on, saying the attack was basically at the mayor, it was not. And then, given even the opportunity to kind of correct herself, then she didn't. And it wasn't until she was dragged through the mud on social media, for example, that she finally had to come out and make an apology. So basically, what authorities did report was explosives were thrown into the crowd of anti-Muslim protesters outside the mayor's residence. The mayor himself was not the target. The apology coming March 11th, right? So the next day or 2 days later, as she said, that wording was inaccurate and I didn't catch it ahead of time. I apologize for the error. The aftermath included significant backlash and calls for an on-air correction, renewed discussion about accuracy and verification in breaking news. And I know the textbook talks a lot about the fact that we're in an area now where, because we have news that happens so quickly, that a lot of times news organizations don't even stop to verify these things. And in this case, I think I will try to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that, she was going off what her network was reporting earlier, but I do think that a producer should have caught it. And the fact that the producer didn't catch it and still let her read it, I think the producer probably knew what they were doing, which is really unfortunate. So I hate to say that. All right. Anyway, which leads us to basically some terms that you should be interested in, or should be very familiar with, or know about, I should say, which is called libel, slander, and actual malice, and they definitely relate to some of the above slides. Libel is defined as a defamation of character in written or broadcast form. Slander is spoken language that defames a person's character. So basically, if you write something false about someone in written or broadcast form, that's libel. If you speak about it and defame someone with using words like that you speak, that's slander. So the thing is, both are very difficult to prove because plaintiffs have to prove falsehood, damages, and negligence, meaning that, like, if Abby went out and said what she said, was she intent on doing that to basically make, for example, conservatives look bad, or to make the anti-Muslim protesters look like the aggressors? I don't know. That is, that's only in Abby's head, right? So very difficult to prove either libel or slander in either case, right? It's more difficult to prove in cases involving public figures who must also prove actual malice, that a reporter or editor knew the statement was false. So or printed, false, or broadcast, meaning that if a reporter is reporting on something that a politician says or someone says, and it's clearly false, if they know it's false, if they went on the air and knew it was false, then they would be probably in trouble. But if they did not know, then it might be more difficult to prove actual malice, right? So anyway, I took a whole thing on constitutional law 100 years ago at the University of Colorado, but that's basically the, kind of what libel, slander, and malice are. The book talks about it. I encourage you to look more into that, because I think as we talk about disinformation, we talk about misinformation, we talk about folks who don't believe what they're hearing in news broadcasts. Is it being done purposely? Is it being done because someone just has a certain lens that they see the world through? And, anytime that, say, for example, the president speaks, they're going to paint it in somewhat of a negative light. Or anytime, back when President Obama or President Biden was in power, and you had people on the other side, conservatives, who automatically thought whatever they said was just not right. It's very difficult to, in this day and age, to really kind of like legally pin down someone for doing something absolutely, harmful, etc. So anyway, libel is a code word. I just added that for your second set. Libel. Anyway, that'll do it for part 2. With part 3 coming up, it'll be all about newspapers. So that is it. And we'll see you soon.